Hey, this is Zack. Thank you for tuning into my channel. Do me a favor. If you like my content, do me a favor and hit that like button. Hit the subscribe, hit the like button, and hit the Cash App that's on the bottom. I want to thank you guys for following me all the way through my life story, and it concludes with my bid in prison. Although, once this is done, this will be the end of my life story. During a lot of my podcasts, I'm going to talk about my life after prison and what I've been able to do, the help and the support and the friendship I've had from Matt. It's been absolutely invaluable. It's helped me get this going. Just all the things, the relationship with my daughter, whom we're going to try to do a second video with her. Some of my friends that I've met, not only from in there, but the friends I had that were part of me, that were part of the hustle that I was originally doing, that knew me from the beginning and know me now. All those things that I'm going to bring that to life in my podcast, and I really appreciate you guys following along. So I think where I left off the last time was at my arrest after being questioned by the FBI and receiving my 16 and a half year sentence. Now, what I remember the most is fighting, trying to get the sentencing guideline is kind of bizarre. The way the federal system works is that you are facing a charge. Like once you're convicted of a charge, you're facing, let's say in my situation, I'm facing between 0 and 30 years. What they do is they look at all the factors of your crime and give you points for those factors. And so each individual that has similar factors, they give similar points. So everything that I've done, right, they can match me up with something. If someone in California did the exact same things that I did, that me and that person would get the same sentence. So kind of like if I had more than 10 victims, right? Or if I stole more than a certain amount of money, or if the scheme involved me working with more than 4 people, all those different factors they figure out and give me points for each. So if somebody, like I said, if somebody else did it, we'd both get the same sentence. The problem with that, because that seems like a fair system to match those factors up. The problem with those factors is the facts that it's based on. So what happens is they accuse me of having more than 10 victims. Was one of the issues I had. Well, it turned out I actually had less than 10 victims. And what happens when they make that accusation at sentencing, I have to prove that accusation is not true. So that puts a burden on me to disprove information that's being provided at sentencing that's going to give me a greater sentence. Needless to say, initially I started out thinking that when I pled guilty, I'd probably get about 5 or 6 years in prison. I've never been to prison before. Of course, I've been to county jail many times. So I'm preparing myself mentally for 5 or 6 years in prison. When they put together this calculation report, which they call a pre-sentencing report, it came out to 200 months in prison, which is almost 18 years. And I'm thinking okay, I've only stole, you've only know about $140,000 worth of theft. How in God's name does that equate to that much time? Granted, they do base a lot of how much time you get by how many prior convictions you have. And I had plenty. I fell into the category where you get the most. They only allot you 13 points before they put you in the maximum category. Now, 13 points might seem like a lot, but it's not when you're giving each conviction 3 points. If you were giving each conviction 1 point, then 13 convictions seems like a lot. But if you're giving felony convictions 3 points, then you only need 3 convictions to arrive at 13. 3 felonies and 1 misdemeanor, and you arrive at 13. Or you could have been on probation when you committed the last offense and they give you a point. They just start adding up different points. Needless to say, I wasn't able to overcome a lot of those objections. That's a long legal story that I would love to get into because I feel like I was robbed, and dealing with it, it's hard to even express that because people are like, well, you did a lot of stuff. And I did, but I still feel like I was robbed. I did a lot of stuff, but I still feel like I was robbed. But I probably shouldn't feel that way because I definitely got away with a lot of stuff. So it's a balance out. It's the criminal thinking, the way we go. For some reason, I want to be able to steal a lot of money from people and then get treated fairly in court and think that they're wrong for treating me unfair. So it's the way we criminals think. So I got to fix that thinking. Anyway, needless to say, at the end of it all, I scored out to 198 months. Now, it's weird because I was trying to fight to get a couple of, no, actually, I'm sorry, I scored out to 144 months, but I had 2 counts of identity theft, which is to run consecutive. The only agreement I made with the government is that he would run the 2 counts of identity theft concurrent with each other, right? Which would give me 12 years plus 2, which would be 14. It took me a long time to accept the fact that I might be going to jail for 14 years. But when I got to court, my judge was extremely mad at me. I'm not 100% certain why, because I'd never met him. He was extremely mad at me because he felt that identity thieves were equivalent to sex offenders because of the pain and suffering that they put toward their victims, which is something he said at court. And, I immediately look at my lawyer and going, did you just hear what this man said? But never mind that. So my judge was extremely mad at me, and so he decided that rather than honor the agreement that I made with the prosecutor and run the 2 counts of identity theft, the 24 months consecutive, he would actually run them concurrent, which means together. He would actually choose to run them separate. So he took my measly 14 years and expanded it to 16 years in prison. He sentenced me to 198 months. So when I heard this standing there, like I was trying to calculate how much time that was, and I became very dizzy. So then, I'm moving around and it's a weird feeling that you get that you're standing there like 198 months. What? How much time is that? And the judge is like, Mr. Allen, Mr. Allen. I'm like, I'm gonna pass out. It was sickening. It was absolutely sickening. And when I got to the back, it was hard for me to even process. I said, there is no way in the world that I can go away from prison when I have a 5-month-old daughter and do 198 months. It's just something that I simply can't do. I've heard many, many jokes about people in court that tell the judge when they give them a long sentence that, like, Your Honor, I can't do 198 months. And where the judge supposedly says, well, just do as much as you can, son. which is kind of like, whenever you want to give up, you can check out. We don't even care about you, is their response. So I'm off to do my 198 months. Now, the first prison that I go to is Coleman. I go to Coleman Medium, where I start off, which my initial moment of getting there, I'm terrified. I'm scared at the whole prison prospect anyway. So by the time I get to, because I've never been to prison before. So by the time I get to Coleman, I'm terrified. I don't know what to think, how to feel. In fact, when they let us out on the compound and I'm walking around looking, I felt like I was on a college campus. I didn't know where I was going. They're like, you're going to this building, here's your room, this is where you're gonna stay. I don't even know what to think. It's all a very daunting experience to go there. I go in for the first night. When I'm there, luckily for me, I get a room by myself because I'm exhausted. I go in the room and fall asleep. Nobody gives you any type of guidance for prison, which is why that certain prisoners, I've heard when they've gotten out, have actually started a service of helping people get mentally prepared for prison. It's nice to be able, if you're going to go to prison, especially when they're starting locking up different prominent and important people, it's nice to be able to have someone that you can ask multiple questions, or to have like a life coach that can tell you things on how to handle different situations that may come up of someone that's been there. I'm kind of impressed by that whole proposition. So I didn't have any of that. When you're broke and you go to jail and you don't get to get out, and plus you're a hardened criminal like myself that's been to county jail, prison should be the natural environment. You should be ready. So I go in there the first night, I'm sleeping in the room by myself. I don't know how to get breakfast. I don't know how anything operates. I don't know how to move around. I'm at Coleman. So Coleman, of course, is where I met Matt. So while I'm there, of course, I managed to meet a couple of people. One of the people told me that Matt Cox was there on the compound. Now, I know in other podcasts where Matt and I have talked about Matt, and I heard about Matt when he was America's Most Wanted. I was doing one of my county jail bids for me and my girl from a hotel. I'm in jail and I read the paper about Matthew Cox going on the run. And like, I'm reading how he's done mortgage fraud in Tampa. Absolutely impressed. Like, about the amount of money, just that I'm describing the scheme, I'm wondering how did he do it? And he automatically became my hero. I'm like, this dude is doing the damn thing. And I remember honestly thinking to myself, I pray that I could meet a person like this one day. Somebody that's actually putting this type of scheme and scam together, to do it at a level to where he's on the front page of the newspaper and he's on national television. Like, that's the kind of person I wish I could meet. I idolized him from the very moment. That's when I learned Matthew Cox's name. Another thing I've mentioned before is once I got out and got back with my girl and we were driving back and forth to Atlanta, we would drive past Coleman. Now, Coleman is not something you can see from the highway, but there is a sign that says Coleman Federal Correctional Complex, exit, the next exit here. Kind of like letting you know how to get to Coleman. So one day as we're driving, my girl and I see the sign for the Coleman Federal Correction Complex. This is no joke. And this is one of those things that in life that seems very bizarre. And if I heard someone saying it, I would be skeptical as it being true. But I'm just telling you this because it actually happened to me. And I can't even believe I had this perception. But as I'm driving by that complex, I look and I actually say out loud to my girl, because I had told her about Matt Cox. I said, can you believe this guy? We talked about him briefly. I'm driving and I said, you know what? That's probably the only place I would meet a guy like Matt Cox is at a federal prison. I don't know what brought that thought to my mind. I don't know how I collected both of that together or what type of premonition that allowed me to see that, but I actually saw that happening. Not that I would meet, because I saw a picture of Matt. It was a horrible picture. He looked like a weirdo, which I probably don't take much of that back, but he probably thinks I look like a weirdo too. But I told myself that's probably the only place that I would end up meeting Matt Cox. Because I wanted to meet him, praying that somehow I'd run into him. Of course, if I ran into him, he'd be like, no, I'm not Matt Cox. I'm America's Most Wanted. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So figuring that the only way I would probably be privileged enough to meet him would be through federal prison. Needless to say, about a year and a half, 2 years later, and a 198-month sentence for me and a 30-year sentence for Matt, we were at Coleman together. 26 years, I'm sorry, I got a correction from the rafters. The 26-year sentence for Matt, we were at Coleman together. So I had made friends with a gentleman by the name of Palmer. Palmer was a weird OCD guy that robbed banks. I liked Palmer because his OCD actually helped me process my thoughts. So he became my buddy that would actually help me process thoughts. And he told me being his friend and helping me process my thoughts about being in prison was actually helping him make it. Because he would end up going to the special housing unit because part of the time he can't deal with the compound. Situations would come up that he couldn't mentally handle, and if he didn't have a way to process his thoughts, he'd ask to go to the special housing unit to be locked down for a couple of weeks so he can get his thoughts together. This is a guy that wore like all his clothes, long sleeves, sweater, and he worked outside in the heat sweeping up small things off the compound. That's all he wanted to do all day was sweep up. We used to talk all the time. I loved him. He was in there for robbing banks. And he actually intentionally robbed banks so he could spend a few years in prison because the streets had been too much for him to handle. he decided, like, I can't handle the streets anymore, so I need to go to jail. So he ended up going to jail. So that's what happened to Mr. Palmer. All right. I met him. He had another friend that, do you remember his name, Matt? With the mullet? Was it James?
He was there for a gun charge.
Yes. And he believed it was his constant, I guess it was a gentleman by the name of James. James is a black-haired dude that looked like Joe Dirt with black hair. Mullet. He had a mullet on his head. He was absolutely a country bumpkin from Oklahoma. He was there for possessing a handgun and being a convicted felon. And he said there's nothing that would ever keep him from possessing a gun. He was going to always possess a gun, even if he had to move to Alaska. He was going to possess a gun. So I guess he continuously possessed the gun. But he had a mullet. He was crazy. He's the one that knew Matt. And what's so funny is I believe he knew Matt by him knowing Matt's cousin, Reese, who was a little bit weird. So all of this fate is operating for me to get the opportunity to meet Matt. Matt is the person that has me here right now in front of you guys, introducing my podcast for your entertainment. But so all of these things line up for us to meet Matt. So when James, I'm going to call him James because I can't remember his name. When he comes to me and he goes, you know, there's another guy here heavy into fraud. This is when I find out Matt's on the compound because I don't know. I had been there probably about 3 months and I'm starting to get into the swing of things a little bit. Matt and I have never determined who got there first. I think I got there first and he came behind me. But anyway, they were talking to me about him hitting the compound. So one day he's telling me, you know, there's another guy here that's big time into fraud like you. I don't know how I got the reputation of being big time into fraud, you know, because I always felt that I was just some little low level guy doing stuff. But obviously I have a reputation that precedes me. But he tells me there's another guy in here that's big time in fraud like you. I say, really, what's his name? He goes, Matthew Cox. I lit all the way up like, are you kidding me? Matthew Cox is here? He goes, yes. I go, I've got to meet him. I've got to meet him. He goes, well, I think I can arrange a meeting. I said, please do that. Now, Matt has told me that I do believe that he approached him a couple of times. He told me that he was going to introduce us, not a problem. He's going to bring us together. Matt obviously just told me that he mentioned him to Matt that, hey, there's another guy here for fraud you got to meet. Matt says, he said, where is he? I'd like to meet him. But at first he's like, I don't want to meet anybody. The hell with that. I don't want to meet anyone. So here's what happened. Here's how we first met face to face, which didn't go well. The second meeting went well because it was the proper introduction. The first meeting didn't go well. So the James with the mullet and my friend Palmer talked, and Palmer had seen Matt before, but I'd never seen Matt. So one day Palmer and I are walking the compound talking, and he goes, hey, there's Matt Cox right there. I said, where? He goes, right there walking this way. So Matt's walking this way, and I said, hey, excuse me. And Matt looks at me. I go, I heard we have a lot in common. Matt goes, oh, Jesus, what the hell's going on? And he just walks off. And I go, okay, that introduction didn't go too well. He comes to find out that I think Matt had big black men in prison that had been pursuing him for, let's say, friends with benefit opportunities. And I had no idea, being a big black man, that if I approached his little white ass, that he would think that I was trying to be a friends with benefit, which I actually am. I mean, I want to be on the YouTube channel, but I don't want to be that type of benefit guy. So that first introduction didn't go well. So then I started thinking, well, maybe, you know, this guy doesn't want to talk to or deal with anybody. But when the second introduction came, and Matt goes, oh, dude, he goes, that's when he told me. When we met, I said, you know, I do fraud. He goes, oh, he goes, bro. He goes, when you first met me and you tell me that, he goes, I can't tell you how many guys. And that's when he explains to me how people have been approaching him, you know, like, hey, Matt. Matt's like, yeah, what's up? He goes, hey, Matt, I need a friend. And Matt's kind of like, well, there's a lot of guys on the compound. I mean, how long have you been here? I've been here a few years, but you don't have any friends yet? And the guy's like, well, I need a special friend. And those type of introductions had Matt thinking that every big black guy was after a little white ass, which they probably are. But at that time, it wasn't me. But let's go into a different story. The funny thing about meeting Matt, when we met in prison, I already had a job there. I was working in education for a gentleman by the name of Mr. Harmon. And so I was a tutor teaching people. And when Matt and I met, we talked, we went to the library and we talked. We had the ability to relate stories back and forth to where we ended up like the first 2 weeks, like every opportunity, every free time I had going and talking. Sometimes I even invite him to come over to my class and hang out with my class. And to the point where I just made the guy that I work for give him a job as a second tutor. Even though he really didn't tutor, he just kind of was there. He'd help with a math problem every once in a while. He drew on the chalkboard for us, because he's a great artist. But he was basically there. At that point, that's when our friendship became. We had been friends for a while. It became us two. Now, what I didn't and this is kind of funny for me, what I didn't realize is two high-profile frauders sitting around talking and exchanging fraud stories got the attention of what I call relief seekers. Now, let me tell you what a relief seeker is. The feds buy information. The way the feds buy information is, if you know something about a crime that's been committed, right, where they can make an arrest or a prosecution and get something going, the feds will pay you for it. Now, obviously, in some instances, they will give you money, but in some other instances, they will recommend to the prosecutor to take some time off of your sentence. It's a very big thing that happens in the feds. They're talking about it now, even with the cases that are going on politically, saying that all of the co-defendants in some of these big cases, sooner or later, are going to flip on the other person to try to save themselves. Well, that's what actually goes on inside prison. There are people actively looking for situations to tell to the authorities that would get them a time cut. To give you an example, while I was at Coleman, these are the ones that I know that actually happened. I'm not even going to name them, because I even know the names, and some of them I even remember the name of the victim. But 4 people in Coleman that were in their federal charges, minor federal charges, got there and started talking to people about murders that they actually committed. Those people would contact the county sheriff, tell them about this murder, that this guy just confessed to me, get the evidence that they needed to open up a murder case and charge the guy with murder. Once the guy would go to trial, the person in prison would show up and offer or really connect evidence to get him a conviction, to get him put away forever. Now, things like that would generally cut a person's sentence in half. So if you had a 20-year sentence, you'd only do 10. Like, that's what I would call a relief seeker. Now, I wanted to do something like that. Obviously, I wanted to take my 15-year sentence or 16-year sentence and turn it into 8. But the problem I had with doing that is I felt like working against a murderer on a murder that he committed, that they didn't have enough evidence to charge him, and I become the linchpin for him to go to jail, for him to get charged and prosecuted. I felt like if by some off chance that my testimony didn't prove enough to get him convicted and he got released, I felt like I'd be putting myself and my family in a lot of jeopardy, rolling the dice. Of course, they promise you that, we're going to protect you and save you, but many times being locked up in the federal system, I've seen where people who've told have gotten beaten to a bloody pulp, and I felt like, that promise kind of wears a little thin, so I never wanted to try it. So you had relief seekers there doing that. Unfortunately for Matt and I, or I should say more for me, because Matt wasn't involved in this, unfortunately for me, the relief seekers saw 2 wimpy-ass frauders that were talking about scams as an opportunity to tell people, hey, those guys are actually planning scams right now. And I will admit this to say there were people trying to cook, because part of the scamming that I did was filing fraudulent tax returns. And someone asked me if I knew how to do that, and my answer to that was yes. So they asked me if I would draw up, they wanted me to get involved in it, and I told them no. I'm like, no, I don't really have a connection, or I don't want to bring any people from the outside to do that crap. I don't care how much money it pays. But they wanted my help in the drawing up the numbers and filing the taxes. It actually became a conspiracy that they were cooking up in there. And I got in the middle of it. So what happened to me is I started writing up the numbers to help people do this do fraudulent taxes. By just doing that, I put myself in an investigation that was so broad and so wide. I was in the middle of that they actually walked around the compound and started picking up people to arrest them, because they believed that I had put together a scam to file income taxes. They locked me up, gave me a 100 series shot for doing this, and then sent me to a penitentiary based on the fact that I had been accused by relief seekers of doing that. Now, needless to say, after I did a Freedom of Information Act request, I found out that they really, really, really wanted to bring charges and weren't able to get charges brought. They were denied that opportunity because they wanted to really charge us, and because nothing really got filed and no money was ever taken, they refused to bring charges, even though they had hundreds of witnesses saying that, oh yeah, he was directing us to file fraudulent taxes. Even though we never were actually able to file fraudulent taxes, you still should charge him because he talked to us about filing fraudulent taxes. So prosecutors are like, that's not enough evidence for people in prison to be talking about committing crimes. It's not enough. So being in the middle of that and them trying to bring charges, had them not only question my girl, who had nothing to do with it. Matt told me they pulled him out and asked him about it. He had nothing to do with it. And then they blocked up people all across the compound. Ended up being a big nothing. All that happened was they sent me to Beaumont. So I lost touch with Palmer and a lot of the people that I knew there. I lost touch with Matt. Matt had wrote me and we had talked briefly. And I think one of the things is I ended up going back to court on my 2255 on an appeal that I had going on. And Matt and I had exchanged numbers and information and had vowed that once we all both get out, we were going to join up and be friends and hang out and doing exactly what we're doing now. And we kept that, we honored that commitment to each other. That's how we got together. But I moved from the medium up to a penitentiary where people were often stabbed and brutal murders. A penitentiary where I was actually scared to go on the compound. I went with a friend of mine, and he said, when you get there, just check in. Just tell them to put you in the shoe. And I remember telling myself, but why would I do that? I've never told on anybody, and why would people just beat my ass? But really my logic was, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing law. I'm going to make myself invaluable to these people. I'm going to use my talking ability, my logical ability, and do law and actually have them discuss their case with me and try to help get them out. I'll make myself worthy of their attention to where people will actually want me there and protect me, and I will manage to avoid trouble. Brilliant idea by me, I have to say. It actually worked. It worked to the point, well, of course I had some problems at the beginning because I had a couple people try to extort me because I was in the law library, but near the end when I was there, I was absolutely invaluable, and I was the most popular guy doing law work. Everybody wanted to talk to me. I became the talk of the compound. It's one of those things where every compound I was on, I became extremely popular and everybody knew me. I never quite understood, I guess it's my personality or who I am, and maybe in my mind I play small, but I was very huge to that Beaumont. I think I was bigger on the Beaumont compound than I was on Coleman. I saw a lot of stabbings. I worked in Unicor and did a lot of jobs, and I made a lot of different friends that I kind of hold on to today. When I was at Beaumont is when I did the residential drug program and made a couple of friends there. I made a couple of friends in the challenge program, people that I still talk to. Never really got deep into much situations. I learned how to do Freedom of Information Acts, but I avoided a lot of trouble. I seen a lot of things go on that I'm not very proud of, nor did I want to discuss, because I witnessed probably two people who were, I probably witnessed about 8 people get stabbed. I witnessed about 20 people get beat up and beat badly. I mean, badly. And so the stabbings of the 8 people that I saw get stabbed, 2 of them I heard passed away. So it was horrible. The misinformation, miscommunication. The biggest thing I would say I learned from the pen is how to be respectful of other people's space. As when living in the world out here, it's sometimes people don't pay enough attention to other people's space. Like just this morning today when I was taking my daughter to school and I'm driving along, another car just came in and just stuck the front of his car in front of mine. Like let's say I'm 4 feet away from the other car. Well, another car that wanted to get in between me and the car in front of me just stuck the front of his car in front of mine, which kind of upset me. Like, what the hell? You know, but that's disrespecting someone's space. In prison, that's like, you don't know, you could get beat up or stabbed doing that. Skipping someone in line, bumping into people, walking directly behind somebody. Things like that are considered to be disrespectful. You have to know perimeters and pay attention to what other people got going on. People tell me that all the time. Matter of fact, being in the pen, I've met a couple of people who told me you're not used to being in the pen, and these are the things you have to pay attention to. Being a legal man helped get me tutored on how to make it through the pen. And I learned how to respect other people's space. I find myself still doing that even when I'm in the store or I'm doing something or dealing with other people. And there's a lot of people around. I'm focused on what their space can be. I get mad quicker now when someone disrespects my space. You know, I've noticed that about myself also. I have to learn how to forgive or not say anything weird. But I'm going to tell you something. Living under those type of conditions very easily, in what we call institutionalize you. It gives you that type of thinking where you think it's supposed to happen constantly. Like that's a purpose of life. I'm going to give you an example of someone I met that obviously been in prison for too long at a laundromat. So I went to a laundromat, I went to a laundromat, and it was me. It was early in the morning, and it was me and another guy that was there. And in the laundromat, when you walk into the door, I use the washing machine, so I could generally take a right to go around, or I could walk straight ahead. So there was a gentleman standing there watching the television, and I walked right behind him to get to the washing machine, right? And I put my clothes in the washing machine, right? And then I went out the door, and when I came back in, instead of going right behind him again, I went around the other way. I don't know what made me do it. I just know I did it. I didn't walk directly behind him, but I went around the other way. So while I'm loading clothes or unloading clothes, I don't remember what had happened, this guy approached me, and he said to me, he goes, "I'm glad you used your common sense," right? And I'm like, "Excuse me?" This is the whole transaction. He said, "I'm glad you used your common sense." I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "You used your common sense, and you didn't walk behind me when you came in the second time." And like, I'm not even in the mindset. I'm thinking to myself, like, first of all, what is this guy talking about? Like, I have no idea what he's talking about. And I said, okay, not even understanding, right? And then he walked off. The whole thing was bizarre. But then when I started processing it, I understood what he's saying. He's saying, you disrespected me by walking behind me, right, the first time. and you didn't walk around, same as prison. And because he's in a prison mentality, I guess if I would have walked behind him the second time, we were either going to be fighting or he was going to do something to me because he felt like he was disrespected in a public place. Like, I walked behind him in a public space, which, like, that mentally doesn't even make sense. But it just shows how sometimes people being locked up a long time, how it messes with certain people's mind. And that's what I end up deducing after that one little confrontation. So after 6 years at Beaumont and being a very good boy, I took 2 residential programs I was there in those programs for 3 of the six years. I worked at Unicor for 4 of the 6 years until they closed it. And I relatively stayed out of the way, only got into one fight. I've told the story of where I had to go. When you're at a penitentiary, they tell you that you have to put in work. Now, what putting in work means is when you get there, you have to be willing to go and fight and do what you have to do to prove to everybody that's in your sec or your car, they call it a car. And I was stuck with the Florida car. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. But you have to be able to be willing to start fighting. They have to know that you will fight if it needs to be fight, because sometimes they declare war. And when war is declared, they need you to be able to fight immediately if they declare war. So you have to put in work, meaning that you have to be, when they tell you somebody needs to be beat up, everybody takes turns and it goes around. They normally have people to do it, but you have to do it at least once to show them that you'll do it. So it came up that I had to put in work. And at first I was against it, and they're like, well, but for you to be, I go, I'm the lawman, why do I have to do that? But it came that I had to do it. So I put it off as long as I could, and it came up I had to do it. Well, luckily for me, one punch handled this guy, and we all got away with it, and that was my putting in work, and I never had to do it again. But the situation was, we had one of the people in the Florida car. Now, the problem with the Florida car in federal prison is that for some reason, a lot of the people in Florida have a sickness where they enjoy masturbating in public. So once they send them to prison, these people enjoy pulling out their member in front of female staff and masturbating. They believe that the female staff actually enjoys that, and it makes them feel good sexually inside to know that a man desires them that much that he'll actually masturbate right in front of them, even unprompted or requested. And a lot of times I've seen a lot of dudes get beat up and get shots or incident reports for it. I have to tip my hat to the BOP for solving that problem. The first 9 years, that was prevalent. I saw that happening all the time. Matter of fact, I used to help people fight incident reports where they get written up for it, and I would help people fight the report of masturbating in front of female staff. It was prevalent. It happened all the time. People you dealt with people you thought were absolutely normal, all of a sudden they'd be gone. You're like, what the heck happened to Joe? Oh, he went to the special housing unit for masturbating in front of staff. You're like, what? That doesn't even seem like that kind of guy. I mean, they call them gunners. So that was a big problem for the first 9 years. The BOP figured out that and they tried everything to get rid of it until they did this. They actually gave everyone that did that a misdemeanor sex offense charge. So what'll happen is if you were to expose yourself to a female staff, they would call the local sheriff, file a misdemeanor sexual offense charge, which would make you a sexual offender. So you came to jail with a drug charge. You like masturbating in front of female staff, even though they took a lot of your game time. You stayed in jail and did your time. You got out and everything's normal. But what the BOP did was they started saying, okay, now when you get out, you're a sex offender. And now you have to register as a sex offender, not just while you're on supervised release, but for the rest of your natural life. So what that did was all the people who claimed they couldn't control themselves started controlling themselves. And the people who actually couldn't control themselves, those are the ones that ended up as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. Everybody else kind of said, I don't think I want things to escalate that far. I'm going to stop doing it. And I remember it absolutely disappeared, where it was a major problem before to absolutely nothing. Matter of fact, some of the people I still talk to that are there tell me that they rarely see it happen. They eliminated it by bringing that in. So I take my hat off to them. Very smart, and it solved that problem. But to go back to the point I was making, all right, I used to help people do their legal work and everything, and working for people. Dang it, I forgot where I was. I lost my place. But before that, I was talking about something.
Conflicts you'd gotten into. Remember, you guys? It was the you were a member of like a little gang.
There you go. That's it. That's right. Okay. All right. So back to this. All right. So to go back to what I was talking about, I didn't like being in the Florida car because a lot of the Florida car were people who were considered gunners. They would actually masturbate around a lot of different people. So the first time they wanted me to put in work, I had to go take care of a gunner. This gentleman was allegedly in the chow hall, and he would, while sitting at the table with a bunch of men, he would actually expose himself because there was a female staff nearby. So while you're eating your hot dogs, he was showing you his hot dog, and a lot of them got mad or they said something to him, and they decided that he had to go. So I went up, obviously, it was me and another guy that he's called ATL, right? And, you know, I talk proper. ATL kind of talk proper, but he presents himself as a much of a thug. That's how he used to present himself to me. And so I thought it was hilarious when he did the talking in this, and I got to describe this incident. So it was me, ATL, and there was another guy named Nate. Now, Nate is just a fighter. Nate loves to fight, and he's going to fight all the time. So we went and approached the guy that supposedly exposed himself. ATL was doing the talking. Me and Nate were supposed to be the ones that handled the fighting if he didn't follow direction. So ATL tells the guy, hey, listen, man, you got to go up. This is after a meal. We meet him on the side when there's laundry, and we're standing over there, and we're telling him, hey, man, you need to go ahead and tell these people you don't want to be on the compound anymore. He's like, why do I have to do that? Because you exposed yourself during a meal, and you got to go. And he goes, wait a minute, why y'all gonna get on me when Billy is just saying that stuff to people because he mad because I did blah, blah, blah. And we're like, whoa. It doesn't matter who said what to who. This is ATL talking. You need to go. And he's like, man, I don't think that's right, man. I don't think it's fair that I have to go. I know y'all blah, blah, blah. He's talking. And he's defying ATL. And ATL is, who's supposed to be a thug and tough, is almost rationalizing. There's no toughness about what he's saying at all. And the guy's kind of like, I don't want to do it. So ATL's going, you're not recognizing the seriousness of this situation. So the guy goes, well, let me think about it, man. I don't know. And he even has an apple. So he takes the apple, rubs it on his shirt, and takes what you call a chastising bite of the apple. Like, I don't know if I want to go nowhere. This is him eating the apple. So while we're standing there, I look at Nate. Nate looks at me. Nate kind of like nods, give me the sign. Okay, we're finna beat this guy up, right? So he gives the nod and the sign. And so when I look back, Nate punches him. Because I'm in front of him, Nate's on the side. Nate just punches him. Boom! Spins him around. He falls down, right? And he doesn't, it's funny, the whole thing was hilarious because the apple's still in his hand. He hits the wall, slides down the wall, and he knocks him completely out one punch with the apple in his hand. Everybody that's around, we all leave, including us that approached him, right? When he comes to, he goes up and he leaves the compound. He never comes back. But what's so funny is that was me putting in work. I never even had to touch the guy. I got so fortunate. Although it would have been pretty rough because he might have beat both me and ATL's ass if it had been just us two. Thank God Nate has a haymaker to knock him out. But I did not like being in the Florida car at all. Matter of fact, all partly through it, I told myself if I went to another institution, well, I wasn't going to be in the Texas car. The Texas car is just as bad as the Florida car. I think the Texas car might have more masturbators than the Florida car. It's a pretty good competition. It was pretty bad. So that's how my time was in the penitentiary. I got transferred finally after 6 years and multiple programming and no incident reports, going back to a medium to Jessup, where I ended up being released. When I got to Jessup, I ran into a couple of people that I had known from Coleman that got shipped because Jessup was a much sweeter yard. I made a couple of friends there, went to work back in Unicor making white t-shirts that I enjoy making. Matter of fact, I have 5 of the t-shirts that I managed to slip and mail them out to my house to get t-shirts home. So Jessup was where I think I did the last 2 years in Jessup. I did 6 in, I don't know how, like for me, I did 14 years. I did 6 years in Beaumont for sure. I went to Beaumont in 2012 and left Beaumont in 2018 in the month of February. I left the same month I got there. So I must have been at Coleman. So I got arrested in 2007. I got sentenced in 2008. So I must have, no, because I did a year and a half back in county jail. So yeah, I left, yeah, okay. And I did a year and a half in the SHU. It was a very hard 14 years. It was a very hard 14 years to put together. Now, I want to end it by talking about my daughter, Winter, who is the pride of my life and my absolute heart that I love to death. One of the hardest things about going to prison, and one of the things that I think I hated the most of what my lawyer told me, is like, she's like, well, you're still Winter's father and you can absolutely parent from prison, which I thought was a complete BS statement. Until I met a gentleman by the name of John Gordon. And he's the one that inspired, or his way of parenting is how I did my parenting. I did a little extra than him. And the BOP offers very few programs, like they allow you to read a book to your daughter and you send a video and you send the book. And my daughter still has the book. I used to write my daughter about twice a month, and she still has all of her letters. And she tells me a couple of things that I said in the letters. They mean a lot to her. And but John Gordon told me that he would call his daughter at the same time every week. Like every week he set aside a 15-minute call where he called at the identical time. And I asked him why did he do that, and he said he did that for consistency. He says, put in your daughter's life a moment in time where she's expecting to hear from you. Now, when I went to Beaumont, obviously there was a lockdowns and I didn't get a chance to call and reach out. But I always called on Sunday to talk to her. And every Sunday she would expect my call. And so when she didn't hear from me, there were times when I was in trouble or I was locked down or whatever, and she didn't hear from me. Those are the things that really hurt and affected her. But when I was at Coleman, my mom did everything in her power, even when she was sick, to bring Winter up to see me and her mom. Her mom was at the prison right across the street, but she would bring Winter to see both of us. And calling and talking to Winter every week gave me the security that she knew who I was, that we talked, I asked questions. Sometimes she was engaging, sometimes she wasn't. Just like John, I would take notes of the call, ask her what's going on in her world, where I could reflect back and tell her. And we talk about it sometimes. I have the notebook, and I go through and say, when I called you on this date, this is what you were dealing with grandma, or this is what you were going through with one of our nephews. And it just let her know that her life was important and the time that we had together was important. And so I always thought that meant something. Right? But what I really learned is being present and in her life means a lot more. because at the times, because I was so far away when I got moved to Texas, by screwing up and doing what I did in Coleman and getting moved to Texas, it eliminated me getting visits 2 and 3 times a month to me never getting a visit for 6 years. And that time away made my daughter very uncomfortable where she didn't know me. Because when I got to Jessup, my family put together the money to come and see me, to bring her to see me. And when she came to see me, I never saw anyone more uncomfortable than when I saw her looking at me like I'm her dad and I don't know what to do or how to feel. It was very nerve-wracking. In fact, she's come on my podcast and described how nerve-wracking it was. But for me, it was very hurtful of my decisions leading me to having that impact in her life. Now, things are very different now because she lives with us. We both live together, and we've never been closer. We've never been closer for texting and talking and hanging out and wanting to do things and joking and just having conversations all the time. She even asked that we go out and get something to eat, some sushi, and have a date. So, and every once in a while she'll get a compassionate moment and she'll make me something to eat that lets me know that she really cares. And it taught me that all that I've done wrong, there is still time for me to rectify and change the path that I'm on to make a flourishing and promising future. And I want to say thank you to all you guys for listening in to my stories and subscribing to my podcast and being a fan of my show. I do understand that I haven't been putting out enough content, and I'm constantly trying to get everything together so I can put out more. So I'm going to be here for you guys. I want to thank you for being there for me. This was my life story. Matt's been pushing me to set up interviews. I'm going to bring some interviews on, and I'm also going to come on and talk about some various things that go on in my life with different things. So thank you guys for tuning in to my podcast. That's been my life story. Please make sure if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and hit my Cash App, and let me and Winter know to help us go out to get sushi together, man. Thank you guys. You're awesome, awesome fans. Thanks.